So you found the skeleton. How would you tell it's a dinosaur? You personally, how would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on that.
Hey there, YouTube, the Dapper Dinosaur here. Today we're going to look at a show from the Institute for Creation Research. It's hosted by Trey Bowling and Ivana Samiti, with guests Joe Martin and Frank Sherwin. Now, Martin is called a doctor in this, but let's keep in mind that his doctorate is in dentistry, from the University of Pittsburgh Dental School. Now, that is not an easy degree to get by any means, and I don't want to diminish the accomplishment. But also, it is not in fact a degree in evolutionary biology or anything like it. Frank Sherwin, on the other hand, is also called a doctor, and his doctorate is an honorary degree from Pensacola Christian College. So I'm not going to call him a doctor. The degrees he has actually earned are a bachelor's in biology from Western State College, Funnison, Colorado, and a master's degree in zoology. His study focuses on parasites. We're jumping in after the intro by Trey. He's asking Dr. Martin about how he got into the whole creationism thing.
I know that you have an interesting move into the creation science. I understand you were a dentist?
True. I was a dentist. Went to University of Pittsburgh, College of Dentistry. Got out of there in 1966, height of the Vietnam War. At that point, I was an evolutionist.
So, a normal person not taken in by pseudoscience. Got it. After this, he goes on for a while about being a maybe Buddhist agnostic in the Air Force during Nam, but being a dentist in the presidential fleet in D.C.
And my wife was a casualty nurse. As a matter of fact, we met in basic training at Shepherd Air Force Base. And she was a Christian. I was not, but I knew how to pretend to be a Christian.
Normally, I wouldn't care much about how this guy met his wife, but hold on for what comes next.
I said, didn't even introduce myself. I said, hey, if you're not doing anything tonight, why don't you come down to my room? Not a good thing to say. I mean, even 56 years ago, it was not a good thing to say, okay?
I mean, it's very forward, but since she said no, I'm sure he left it at that, right? He didn't keep harassing her, right?
But she ignored me completely. Next day I see her on the base. I'm a captain. She's only a lieutenant. So after ordering her to salute me, because I had the highest rank.
He was a doctor. His rank was basically just an excuse to pay him enough that he'd be willing to join the military. Everyone knows that the rank of a dentist or a medical doctor isn't the same thing as a regular officer's rank.
But then I ordered her to go out with me that night.
And there it is, explicitly using his military rank to bully a subordinate into dating him. Classy move. So now you all know why I have decided to not be kind or charitable to Dr. Martin. Also, he says that meeting her made him believe in God because that day he'd prayed to either meet his wife or he'd go sleep around.
When I became a theistic evolutionist, I then got offered a job at the dental college, Baylor, as a professor. So I became a professor of dentistry.
He makes it sound like they wouldn't hire him if he weren't a theistic evolutionist. I very much doubt that. They probably wanted a veteran more than they wanted someone with the exact view on biology that they were looking for. And also, let's remember, he's a professor in a dentistry program, not an evolutionary biology program or the like. He's never been trained to do that. That's not what his degree is in.
And my first lecture was on the evolution of the tooth from fish scales, because I'm still an evolutionist, but I'm a Christian, so I still believed in evolution. Well, two of my students challenged me after that lecture. Dr. Martin, would you please study creation science with us? We believe the whole universe is about 6,000 years old. We believe a flood covered this whole world maybe 4,500 years ago. Would you study that with us? I didn't even have to pray about it. I said, of course I'll study that with you. Now, what am I thinking? These guys are back in the Stone Ages.
Crazy.
How did they get in dental school? Doesn't everybody know the scientists have proven billions of years? And they're telling me this whole thing is 6,000. Yeah, I'm going to study with them, okay?
And do you think he looked up any responses to the things the creationists of 50 years ago were saying? No, he did not. And if you think creationists today are bad at science, 50 years ago, they all basically had the same arguments as Kent Hovind has now.
Well, it took almost 5 years for me to go from being a theistic evolutionist to being a biblical, young earth, global flood creationist, which is where I stand today. So that's how I got onto that.
I don't know why, but this guy apparently needs to couch everything in the form of autobiographical storytelling. Maybe he's basically just Grandpa Simpson.
I needed a new heel for my shoe. So I decided to go to Morganville, which is what they call Shelbyville in those days. So I tied an onion to my belt, which was the style at the time. Now, to take the ferry cost a nickel, and in those days, nickels
these
had
students,
pictures
as
of
part of
bumblebees on them.
studying about this whole young Earth idea, they asked me to prove to them how a bombardier beetle could evolve, which got me thinking about animals, okay?
Right.
Bombardier beetles are an interesting lot. They are a group of beetles in the family Caribidae. Well, actually, there are two groups in the family Caribidae, which bomb would be predators in different ways. But among family Caribidae, there are also other beetles who squirt noxious chemicals using the same glands as the bombardier beetles, and the same basic chemicals too, hydrogen peroxide and hydroquinone. Hydroquinones are a normal class of chemicals arthropods use to separate the upper layers of their exoskeleton from the cuticle so that they can shed. But they also taste and smell foul to most animals, and can irritate sensitive tissues, which makes sense since their job is to dissolve organic compounds. Now, normally, hydrogen peroxide and hydroquinone don't react very much, just sort of slowly mixing and turning brown so that the peroxide eventually breaks down, allowing some of the hydroquinones to oxidize into quinones in a reaction that is exothermic, but only mildly so. However, the beetle introduces peroxidase enzymes as well as catalase enzymes that break the hydroquinones into quinones to greatly accelerate the breakdown of the hydrogen peroxide, allowing the hydroquinones to rapidly oxidize, releasing enough energy to raise the temperature of the solution to the boiling point and flash vaporizing about a fifth of it. This mixture is then sprayed at a would-be attacker, accompanied by a loud popping sound. This animal has been a poster child for creationism basically since Duane Gish started talking about it decades ago. Basically, around the same time this guy found out about them. Interestingly though, since there are two separate lineages of bombardier beetles within the family Caribidae, and since creationists usually think of families as created units, it indicates that the prediction from the creationist model is that the bombardier beetles did in fact evolve from non-explosive ancestors, and did it twice, with the typical bombardier beetles that are usually shown by creationists being one type and the flange bombardier beetle being another. And there are still intermediate forms around that squirt the same chemicals or similar ones, but not explosively. So let's take a look at how this could have evolved. And remember, this doesn't have to be how it exactly evolved. It only needs to be a hypothetical series of steps of incremental change that are beneficial or at least neutral at each step. Let's start with a proto-carabid beetle. It makes hydrogen peroxide and hydroquinones for the normal reasons insects do, shedding its exoskeleton and the like. Well, normally insects don't make much hydroquinone after reaching their final molt and becoming a full adult or imago. But this beetle has a mutation that keeps it making a bit extra. Not enough to cause problems for the exoskeleton, but enough that it is now less appetizing to predators. That's all well and good, but it could be better. So the next step is to keep some of that stuff around, perhaps in a bladder adjacent to the glands making the chemicals in the first place. That way, more can be produced without causing problems in the animal's internal systems, and the bug even gets less appetizing to predators. But hey, that still means some individuals will have to be sacrificed in the name of teaching predators that they taste bad. We'll fix that soon. An opening in the bladder to the outside could allow the beetle to ooze a bit of the noxious chemicals, making the little guys smell bad even before being eaten. That's a plus. Then add some muscles so that they can spray out of the little chamber, and that's even better, an active deterrent. Now let's add a division in the chamber so that there's a reservoir and a specialized section for muscular pressurization that allows less than all of the reserve to be used, allowing the beetles to save some of their defensive excretions for a subsequent attack. At this point, some of the enzymes can evolve, which makes the previously simply bad-tasting, foul-smelling, and irritating chemicals a bit more so, and perhaps even a bit dangerous. This isn't going to burn anything, but still, if the glands concentrate in the chamber that was using muscles to pressurize it, then we're already almost at the bombardier beetle. All that's needed is for the amount of enzymes to increase, while the chamber itself increases in toughness, and boom, we're at a bombardier beetle. No magic, no non-functional steps, no fitness decreasing steps. Is this exactly how it happened? I don't know, and it doesn't matter. The argument is that the bombardier beetle could not evolve. So if I show one way in which it could, the argument is defeated. Now it's worth noting that when Dr. Martin was being misinformed about the bombardier beetle, creationists were incorrectly explaining the mechanism by which the explosion was produced. Duane Gish, who near as I can tell originated this nonsense, said that hydrogen peroxide and hydroquinone spontaneously explode when mixed together. He said that this was inhibited by some chemical produced by the bombardier beetle, and that it would release an enzyme to de-inhibit the reaction. This is simply false. I don't know if Dr. Martin also believes this, but based on when he was learning about creationism, he probably at least did believe it, if only then.
So I'm studying this bombardier beetle. They brought me textbooks, different things, and I didn't see any live ones. And I began to realize, you know what? That insect needs all its parts. You can't have a partially evolved bombardier beetle.
Except that's exactly what members of subfamily Anthinae are. They're carapid beetles that squirt at threats, but don't have the explosive reaction of true bombardier beetles. So not only can you have a partially formed bombardier beetle, there are some 39 genera of them, with some genera having more than 50 species. So there are literally hundreds of species of partly formed bombardier beetle. But creationists don't tend to talk about them, so no wonder he doesn't know about them.
I mean, it either has all its parts or it's going to blow itself up every time it mixes these chemicals that have this violent reaction.
Good thing that violent reaction is impossible without some enzymes then. And his phrasing here implies that he does in fact believe in the Gish version of how bombardier beetles work. So that is to say, the wrong version.
All right, and I began to realize, well, if there's one animal that couldn't possibly evolve, that means it needed God to put it together from the first.
Well, it doesn't need to be God, but it does need to be some kind of thing besides evolution. God could probably be one possibility, though. However, we have yet to hear of an animal that couldn't evolve.
All it takes is one.
Yeah, and if there's one, why not all? And then the next one they had me study was a giraffe.
Another Gish classic that now tends to be ignored, because once again, if we accept the common creationist idea that the created kinds are at the family level, there is another giraffid with a short neck that is still around, the okapi. And in the fossils, there are many giraffids with short or intermediate necks, so evidently, even in creationist thought, they did evolve from fairly ordinary ruminants.
And why it doesn't blow its brains out when it bends its head down to get a drink of water?
The giraffe has what amounts to organic check valves in the blood vessels leading to its head. But these are actually extensions of the wall of the blood vessel. They're not some radical new structure. It's just that when pressure is great enough, the pressure itself closes these flaps of tissues to prevent further flow, keeping the giraffe from having a brain hemorrhage when it lowers its head to drink.
I mean, so really, what got me solidly convinced I can trust the Bible, I can trust Genesis, it was really three things. It was God's Word, and it was studying the assumptions behind evolution.
The assumptions basically being that physics has operated in the past as it does now, and that we can study it, I guess? I mean, there are other things that evolution assumes, such as the great age of the Earth, but those are assumed in evolutionary biology because they've been demonstrated by other parts of science, such as geology and nuclear physics. So they're not assumptions in the sense of axiomatic statements that must simply be accepted without any evidence.
Which I didn't think there were any, but I didn't know how to spot them. My students taught me how to spot them. Look, you look for certain words. We think, we believe, this suggests, this is probably, there's consensus. That means they don't know.
Right.
And that gives away that Dr. Martin has never trained in how to read or write scientific literature. First, those phrases are not used for assumptions, but for conclusions. Second, they are used because certainty is simply not something we can get from science. Science is basically a process of elimination.
An ancestor of mine maintained that if you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth.
Basically, science eliminates wrong explanations and keeps those explanations which so far have not failed. Scientists use this guarded language because they are acutely aware that making grandiose claims like, "We are absolutely certain, we know it for a fact," etc., is a great way to get in trouble once it turns out you got something wrong, and chances are that you got at least a little something wrong. Creationists, on the other hand, are full of confidence, and ironically, that in and of itself is a reason not to believe them. No one is more confident than someone who is confidently wrong. You see it in Flat Earth, you see it in creationism, you see it in homeopathy. It's a hallmark of pseudoscientific nonsense.
And when I started looking through the literature, the evolutionary literature, those things are all through there.
As they should be.
So I began to realize their assumptions aren't valid. It's all in their head. And these animals couldn't possibly evolve. All of them. Anyone that you study, plant, animal, human.
This is going to be a big old citation needed for me, Joe.
Now, God's made some backup systems. I mean, we can have our appendix out and still live and different things. But essentially, there are basic essential parts they have to have. You can't have a partially evolved eyeball.
Oh, hey, look, a flatworm with simple eye spots, a jellyfish with eye cups, a nautilus with a pinhole eye. All of those are partially formed eyes as predicted not just by modern evolutionary biology, but by Darwin himself in Origin of Species, way back in the 19th century. Try again, Dr. Martin.
I'm evolving eyes. Well, now we can do that. You're working on that right here, right now, how that works. But they aren't evolving their eyes from no eyes. The genetics are involved in all this, okay?
I don't even know what he's saying there. Who's evolving eyes? From what genetics? What's even going on?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so, if you can't have a partially evolved backbone.
So I guess tunicates, lancelets, hagfish, and sharks don't exist. Someone should tell the aquarium.
I mean, what would a person do?
Be a hagfish. That's what they do. Yeah, if you took the vertebrae out of a human, that'd be bad news. But so what? Evolution doesn't say that humans evolved backbones after they're split with their common ancestor with chimpanzees or something. The spinal column evolved some like 425 million years ago. So the human lineage had a spine for more than 400 million years before it was distinct from the other ape lineages. I feel like he's going to keep assuming that evolution is supposed to happen by adding parts to an otherwise complete human. So at one point, you had some kind of meat suit in the vague shape of a human without any important organs. And then those meat bags just kind of evolved organs like hearts, lungs, eyes, a skeleton, etc. Except, that's an incredibly obvious straw man. Why would the Institute for Creation Research want this guy on? It reflects poorly on them, even by creationist standards.
Or
Not much.
Yeah. Or you're thinking, wait a minute. I mean, my hands are mirror images of each other. Well, that's totally different genetics. I mean, you got to have genetics for each one.
Yikes. That's amazingly dumb. That's not how bilateral symmetry works at all. The whole point of symmetry in biology is that you don't need different genetics for each symmetrical part. They develop from the same developmental genes, and this is done by setting up axes in the embryo using gradients of hormones. In radially symmetrical animals, like cnidarians and ctenophores, one axis is established, the oral-aboral axis. And in bilaterians, like humans, two axes are established, the anterior-posterior axis and the left-right axis. The developmental signals are mirrored on both sides of the left-right axis, and there is no need for separate left and right genes. How would the cells even know which side they're on? Not only is that not how it works, it couldn't work that way. Cells can only detect things like light and chemicals and the gradient of such things. They don't have a way to know if they're on the left or right, but by setting up hormone gradients, they can tell which way is front and which way is back, and which way is distal and which way is proximal. And that's all they need.
But they have to work. And just think of the complicated genetic information that's in there.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm thinking about it. Not sure how that's supposed to lead me to the conclusion that it was a miracle. I think a few steps in that train of logic were skipped. But if you're playing creationist bingo, you can mark off both information without definition and it's too complicated on your cards.
When we start thinking about these things, so I became a convinced young Earth creationist.
Even if these were good points against evolution, how did any of them lead to a young Earth? Evolution could be false, and the Earth could be as old as it evidently is at the same time. He then tells us about how he quit teaching at a dental college to go get a master's in theology from a nearby seminary. His biographical details are of no interest to me.
Absolutely. And that leads us to, eventually, right, your ministry now, Biblical Discipleship Ministries.
Yes.
And I know that a lot of it is centered around, animals, but it's not just about animals, right?
Right.
Hey, props for acknowledging organisms other than animals exist. It's honestly something that people tend to ignore. In fact, there's even a phenomenon called plant blindness. Ever notice that in sci-fi movies, people will go into alien worlds full of strange animals that are very unlike Earth life, but the plants are just Earth plants, complete with grass, flowers, and pine trees? That's because humans tend to see plants as just part of the landscape, and not as the dynamic, living organisms that they are. But you know who aren't just a part of the landscape? My subscribers. So take a moment to subscribe to the channel, hit that bell icon if you haven't already, and turn on all notifications. If you're feeling extra generous, why not join the channel or the Patreon, or just leave a super thanks. If not, just liking the video and sharing it helps a lot.
I wrote a book called The Evolution of a Creationist, which was my testimony, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
But in between each chapter, I have an animal, like the bombardier beetle, the giraffe, the woodpecker.
The woodpecker is an odd one, because usually creationists talk about the fact that its tongue anchors in the nostrils and then goes around the back of the skull, which is highly unusual. But that actually is not how woodpeckers are born, or hatched, I suppose. You can watch the migration in real time, and the animal remains functional the whole time. So what's the problem here? Oh right, he's just getting this from Gish, who was known to lie about things. And I say that because scientists actually performed an experiment to expose his misconceptions about bombardier beetles in front of him in real time, in real life, and then he just didn't bother changing his story after being absolutely shown to be wrong.
And people called up, hey, we just read that book. Could you do some live pictures of these animals? So that's when we did our first series, Incredible Creatures That Defy Evolution. And that's been all over everywhere. I mean, we didn't do much about it, but everywhere. People have seen it in China, and we just had a missionary from China we just talked to. And she's talking away, and she said, and yeah, I was using your Incredible Creatures in my classes in China. I'm thinking, what? Anyway.
Is God using it, or are missionaries using it to mislead people so that they join your religion for bad reasons?
God used it. He still is using it. And so we did that one, and then people kept saying, well, do more animals, do more animals. Well, then that led us to study animals like Frank knows all about. That,
Well, we'll get to you, Frank.
yeah, nobody ever heard of. You know, like the eye and the...
I heard about the eye in high school, and I have no idea what about it couldn't evolve. It's just a nocturnal lemur with big ears and a long finger.
Weta and...
The wetters are basically just really big crickets. I also learned about them in high school, or thereabouts.
and the slow loris. Have you studied the slow loris?
I have. They're wet-nosed primates in the genus Nycticebus. There are 9 named species, with one being extinct, and they live in the jungles of Southeast Asia and Western Oceania. They're venomous, and I think I did not learn about them until after high school, but I certainly didn't first hear about them in this video.
Don't know what it is.
Is that right? Isn't that too bad?
Yeah, shame on me.
It is.
Don't tell Frank.
Because we live in Satan's world system.
There's a satanic plot to hide the fact that a genus of loris exists in, like, 12 of the most highly populated countries in the world? I'm sorry, but no. That's crazy enough that I don't even feel a need to respond to the claim that a group of animals that has a Wikipedia page is being hidden by Satan.
And if there's anything could not possibly evolve, we're not allowed to know about it.
Oh, okay, so there's a satanic plot to hide all the animals he's mentioned. So giraffes, bombardier beetles, woodpeckers, wettas, slow lorises, and eyes. I feel like all the zoos in the world need to get the memo that Satan wants to hide giraffes from the world. Also, how did Weta Workshop, the New Zealand-based special effects and prop company that did the props and special effects for the Lord of the Rings films, get past the satanic conspiracy with that name? Once again, how did this nutjob not get vetted for the show? I know ICR is bad, but are they really Satan is hiding the giraffes bad?
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons we did all these DVDs, to let people know what God did so they can give him honor. What's the whole purpose? People come to know Jesus as a result.
If you have to resort to misinforming people about biology to get them to believe in your religion, maybe it's not worth believing in.
Okay, slow loris. It's the only venomous primate. You can't have a venomous primate, according to evolution. Okay.
Well, that's quite the claim. And why can't venom evolve in a primate? What is venom? Well, it's a biotoxin delivered through a wound, such as a slash or a puncture. This is in contrast with a poison, which is ingested. So primates can bite, and since proteins can evolve and venom is a protein, why couldn't a primate evolve to make a venom? Now, if it evolved the hollow-fanged mouth parts of a spider, and it made a venom chemically identical to cobra venom, that would be hard to explain via evolution. In fact, that would be strong evidence against the idea that the slow loris evolved. But that's not what's going on here.
So it has venom glands under its arm, right in here. And when it needs venom, it just licks the gland. I can't get mine up there anymore.
Practice that flexibility a little bit, right?
Yeah. I think this one's metal. This one's, anyway. So, yeah, it'll lick it and mix it with saliva, and then it bites. Venom. Venom is with a bite. Poison, you swallow.
That's true.
That's true.
But also, mother slow lorises will groom their young with their teeth combs after licking this venom, covering the young with a toxin which makes binturongs, clouded leopards, and sun bears at least, show strong negative reactions. So even without the bite, the venom is a powerful deterrent to predators.
We did some of those animals. People kept saying, do more, do more, do more. Well, then we took a trip to Alaska.
Oh, so no actual reason why the slow loris couldn't evolve. That's just a bald assertion. Fun. Well, in fact, there are no particular barriers to the evolution of this venom. Chemically, it is very similar to the chemical in cat dander that causes allergies in susceptible humans. One interesting hypothesis is that it actually evolved primarily to smell like cobra venom, and that the allergenic nature of the chemical may have been a byproduct of that, which was then further enhanced by natural selection. I don't know if that's actually what happened, but it's a cool possibility.
A family up there, the Peranian family, he's a pilot with Alaskan Airlines. He said, if you'll just come up, I'll fly you up and we'll take care of you. And they really did. We got to see the humpback whales with their bubble nets coming up, with their mouths open, 3 at a time we saw. And we saw the puffins and the murres, and we saw these beautiful birds. And we thought, what, we need to do that. We need to make some videos with all these Alaskan animals.
This just in. Old man looks at cool animals, decides for no reason that they couldn't evolve, and that Satan must be hiding them. That's the whole story he just told.
So we started with one video, and that went to 2, and now we're finishing, I think, at 3.
Unless you find more animals.
We've already found more animals, but it's like someone said, we need to do barnyard animals.
I'm pretty sure this guy's whole career in creationism is just pointing at something cool in the animal kingdom and then just asserting that it couldn't evolve without ever saying why.
Everyone wants you to leave Alaska. That's what it is.
Yeah, exactly. So, you think, like a caribou. Unbelievable. But a caribou, it's the only deer that the female has antlers too.
That's mostly true. Female deer of other species can grow antlers, but usually that's because they are overproducing testosterone, or are especially sensitive to it, or are less sensitive than usual to estrogen. Essentially, this is analogous to various intersex conditions in humans that result from an unusual sensitivity to sex hormones or an unusual balance between them. It is the case that among all deer species, only Rangifer tarandus, the caribou or reindeer, as they are also called, have females that regularly grow antlers.
And you'd say, well, why did God make it so there's one deer with the female has antlers? Well, because in the wintertime, when the males lose their antlers, like after the mating season, maybe late November, early December, you get into January now, we're in a blizzard, and Mama Caribou is pregnant, and she needs good food. So she'll find a nice lichen bed, and she'll dig down there and find it, and here comes this bull over. Hey, I want those lichens. And she says, well, I'm sorry, sir. I found these lichens. I'm going to eat my lichens. And nope, I'm the bull. Just move it. She's, well, I'm sorry, sir. I have the antlers. You move it. So God made it so she can protect the best food, and then she loses her antlers in the spring.
That is, in fact, a good summary of the use of antlers in female R. tarandus individuals. But what about that indicates that evolution couldn't do it? Especially since this is actually a unique aspect of only one species in the family Cervidae, that is, the true deer. By most estimations by creationists, this actually did evolve, unless we want to say that females bearing antlers is actually the ancestral condition and that all deer populations, except for one solitary species, lost this trait. Alternatively, Dr. Martin could be saying that this species is the created unit in nature, but then he'd have trouble explaining the ability of various species to hybridize, as well as how Noah could have possibly fit so many animals on the ark. Wait, does this mean that the satanic conspiracy to make it so you can't learn about animals covers reindeer too? Why didn't they stop them from becoming prominent Yuletide fixtures in popular imagination? It seems like nearly everyone knows about reindeer. Satan sucks at this.
So, and she can see ultraviolet light. So like a polar bear thinks I'm going to have myself a caribou for lunch. Well, because she sees ultraviolet light and the polar bear hair absorbs ultraviolet light, it looks black to her.
Well, no, it would appear darker than the surrounding snow to her, not black. But also the wavelengths that opsins in the retina cells react to is based on their chemical properties, which is in turn controlled by the genes that make them. What about ultraviolet sensitive opsins is impossible for evolution? We know that mutations can make changes in opsins, since we see it in humans with color blindness, and even in primates, who as a whole have trichromatic vision thanks to a duplication of one of the original bichromatic mammal opsin genes, which subsequently went on to mutate. That's why a graph of human spectral sensitivity doesn't show evenly spaced sensitivity of various cone types. The red and green cone types are much closer to each other than they are to the blue type spectrum, which is itself suboptimal. It's because they both used to be a single cone type, as remains true in virtually all other mammals, like your dog. That's why you should get your dog a blue ball, not a red ball. Red balls just blend in with the grass, but a blue ball will not. They see it as a different color. Anyway, all that is to say that I see no reason why this should be unable to evolve. And also, your retina can also see near ultraviolet light, but it's filtered by your eye. But some people with damage or degeneration of their eye lens can actually perceive near UV light.
So there's this polar bear sneaking up, Nobody sees me in this snow. I'm white. Nobody sees me. And the caribou says, here comes that polar bear. Okay, come on. Well, let's give him a little more time, and then we better move. I mean, it's like God thought of everything.
Or, those deer with better sensitivity to ultraviolet light were better at avoiding predation and passed this ability down to their offspring because of natural selection. I don't know. That seems like a possibility. Also, how does this jive with ICR's idea of continuous environmental tracking? How could the deer know to become more sensitive to ultraviolet light unless they could sense it in the first place? Because remember, this idea requires that animals are active decision makers. Yep, counterflow temperature control is actually common in many animals that live in extreme temperatures, whether hot or cold. But in all animals with a closed circulatory system, veins and arteries exchange heat, simply because through the body they're in thermal contact. All this counterflow is moving the blood vessels closer to each other to make this more efficient. But what about this is impossible? Does Dr. Martin think that no mutation could ever result in a vein and an artery in the same limb growing closer together than they would have in the ancestors of the organisms with this mutation? That would certainly be a weird take. And also, does the satanic conspiracy now cover basically all polar and desert vertebrates? That seems weird because I feel like most people know about at least a few polar and a few desert animals.
And they control the temperature in their legs. So, I mean, if it's really cold, they need the temperature to keep their brains warm, keep their organs warm. As the artery comes down the leg, it comes up close to the vein. So the vein is coming up with really cold blood. The artery is going down with really warm blood. Because they're right next to each other, it transfers over. So when the blood from the vein in the leg comes up to the heart, it's warmed up again. But they can control that somehow. Maybe they only need 45-degree legs. Maybe they don't need 38-degree legs. They control that somehow. I've not read an article yet where they tell us how. Have you read anything about that?
Countercurrent system, absolutely amazing.
It is. There's other animals have that. And so anyway.
I need a citation on the idea that reindeer can control how warm their legs are such that the same deer can, in the same temperature, have significantly different leg temperatures depending on just how it feels. Sure, body activity can increase temperature, so the deer will likely have warmer legs after running than after standing around and licking lichen. And of course, Dr. Martin's own citation is that he doesn't have one. Nice.
It's just amazing.
Yeah, well, I wanted to also know with Dr. Frank, if your background with animals and all of that, if you could give our audience, I don't know if everyone is familiar with, even for you, if you were an evolutionist at one point, and just some of those things that pulled you in the same direction as Dr. Martin.
Before Mr. Frank goes, let's just remember that his doctorate is honorary. He didn't have to do anything in particular for it. He didn't actually do the work of getting a postgraduate degree. It doesn't qualify him for any jobs requiring such a degree. All it says is that some creationist school thought he was cool and gave him a free piece of paper. There's nothing wrong with getting an honorary degree, but also let's not pretend that it actually makes you a qualified scientist.
Well, it's interesting, and we have kind of the same background a little bit. I was never agnostic. I was belonged to a religion that depended very much on works.
I bet by that he means Catholic, because anytime Protestants say based on work, there's a 99% chance they're talking about Catholicism. This is apparently because they always skip over the book of James when reading the Bible. Heck, Martin Luther, the founder of the Protestant movement, wanted to chuck it out of the Bible and called it an epistle of straw. So much for sola scriptura if you get to decide what's in the scripture. Oh well, this is mostly irrelevant. It's just that phrases like works-based religion scratch at the inside of my mind like nails on a chalkboard.
And so I believed in God and all. And I graduated the bottom of my class in high school. I got a D in high school biology. And then I got into a college only because my grandfather, who his best friend was a billionaire out of Nebraska. And so he talked to his billionaire friend of getting this dumb guy, me, into a college. And
hey, didn't Lori Loughlin go to prison for that? Good to know that Martin was a bad student who needed illegal nepotism to get into school. Gee, ICR, you're bringing in some real winners. A guy who is basically an admitted sexual predator, and a guy who didn't qualify for his undergraduate program and has a pretend PhD.
So I got into the college and immediately was put on probation, both academic and social probation. I won't go down that road, but put on two kinds of probation, and the end of the school year, they kicked me out. And so I was immediately drafted by the Army, so I quickly joined the Navy instead.
As much as I don't like the Navy, compared to the Army in wartime, I can see why he'd want to do that.
Yeah, for another 2 years. And so I went to boot camp, and then I went to jet engine training school. Then I went to a squadron on the West Coast where we immediately left for Vietnam on board the USS Constellation.
Hey, I've been on the Connie. It was after she was decommissioned, and she was basically a ghost ship. I was there to rob of little plastic signs that said not in use or something like that. But still, I've been there. I went all over the engine rooms, down a lot of the corridors, walked around the hangar bay.
And so I was working up on the flight deck, and it was a very dangerous place, very dangerous. And I thought, if I get killed, I'm not in good standing with God. Well, about this time, the Navigator Ministry that was active in Colorado Springs had a Bible study, and somehow I got hooked up with them. There was a guy in my division who was a very bold Christian. Very bold. He was built like a refrigerator, not an ounce of fat, and he wasn't arrogant, but he was quite bold.
Sounds like he was preachy.
And I thought, boy, if I ever became a Christian, yeah, he was quite the model, and so
you were a Christian. The Catholic Church is the single largest Christian church in the world. Slightly over half of all Christians are Catholics, about 37% Protestant, and about 10% Eastern Orthodox.
He took me to a fellowship in the ship's chapel, USS Constellation, January of 71. And the third verse is, just as I am, I went forward and received Christ. And there's a tiny ship's chapel for an aircraft carrier. I think it doubled as a broom closet. But I got saved. I was still an evolutionist.
I can't say how big the chapel was on the Connie, but I do know that on my ship, it was fairly small, although it definitely did not double as storage except for some shelves with religious texts donated by various religious groups, such as Bibles, catechisms, Books of Mormon, etc. These were there for the taking, and it's how I got my copy of the Catholic Catechism, the Book of Mormon, and the Pearl of Great Price.
Still an evolutionist. I couldn't bring myself to believe in the opening chapters of Genesis.
I bet if someone asked him at the time, he would have said that yes, he did believe in the opening chapters of Genesis, but that he didn't think they were written as literal history. And there are good reasons not to believe those chapters in that way.
But when I was working on the jet engine shop, working on these big J79 engines that went into the Phantom II and all that, somebody had left a little booklet on the jet engine test stand called Have You Been Brainwashed by Dwayne Gish.
Let's see if we can't find that online. And of course we can. It's a 1974 comic by Dwayne T. Gish. It starts off with Gish basically jerking himself off about how most students probably are just waiting to hear anything anti-evolution, and how he's going to break all audience turnout records at whatever school he talks at. He then conflates abiogenesis with evolution, because of course he does. He just lies about the fossil record, because again, of course he does. He says that we should have fish with legs today, ignoring all the walking fish that do in fact exist today. He says that Archaeopteryx wasn't transitional because it had wings and could fly, even though it probably couldn't fly, just glide. He pretends that differences in rib count of fossil equids means that they couldn't have evolved from each other, even though the modern horse has intraspecific variation in rib count. He lies about the fossil record of Giraffidae, and even just pretends that the okapi wasn't known when it had been discovered some 73 years prior, also that he can say there are no short-necked giraffes. He lies about basically all the fossil hominins, Known at the time, always giving the cutesy common names popular in creationist circles like Peking Man and Java Man, he thinks that the Piltdown hoax and the Nebraska Man misidentification are somehow embarrassing for scientists today. Then it's time for big numbers, therefore God, specifically in the form of what are the chances of a protein forming by chance, ignoring that they do not in fact form by chance, and that he, like those who came after him, never bothered to determine the fraction of sequence space with function, assuming it to always be 1 over n, where n is the number of amino acids in a protein, even though we know for a fact that's not true, simply for the reason that just in humans, most proteins have many variations in amino acid sequence. Then we jump right into lying about the second law of thermodynamics. After that, it's some fine-tuning arguments about how life on Earth requires Earth to be just so, ignoring the fact that life adapted to Earth, and that in the past the conditions on Earth have been different, and when there were rapid changes, that life that existed didn't do too well. Then it's just an altar call in book form. Basically, the thing is a shotgun of all the worst creationist arguments, including many, such as the long neck of the giraffe, that modern creationists tend not to use because of how bad they are. I can't see how this convinced anyone who wasn't already inclined to believe it, and at least in the case of Frank Sherwin, it seems like he was already inclined to believe it.
And I didn't know who this guy Gish was, but I read the booklet and I was amazed of the scientific evidence against evolution and the scientific evidence in favor of creation.
None of either of which are actually in that pamphlet. Even if it weren't almost all lies, it's not like it has citations, not that he could have checked while on an aircraft carrier in the 1970s, but he could have at a library when he was back on shore.
So I read that 2 or 3 times, and I was hooked. I began to study creation science in this organization in California called the Institute for Creation Research.
Never heard of it.
Never heard of it. And so I got out of the Navy and went to college, majored in biology, and was using ICR literature as I was taking my biology classes.
I've read some of the 1970s and 80s ICR literature. It's even worse than today's stuff, and that's saying something.
Graduated, joined a city fire department for about 5 years, and when I was on the fire department up in Estes Park, Colorado, there was an ICR speaker named Gary Parker. So I drove up my little car up there with a cassette player and a fistful of cassettes, and I recorded every word that Gary Parker said. He did a Saturday seminar.
I'd be interested to know if those recordings have been uploaded anywhere. I'd like seeing how the talking points of creationists have evolved over the decades. Back in the 70s and 80s, they were still rejecting evolution, unlike most modern creationists who rely on it so they can pack all the animals into the ark.
He spoke hour after hour after hour, took a lunch break, then he spoke again until finally his host has to get up and said, listen, we got to be out of here 2 hours ago. And so I had all of these tapes of Gary Parker with his lectures, and for the next year and a half, I listened to those tapes. I can still say them today because I listened to them. And so,
but did Sherwin also do things like investigate the claims of the actual scientists in the relevant fields? Did he check the papers they were writing? Did he do any critical analysis of the creationist texts and speeches he was consuming? Not that I can tell. So we have a man who wants to believe reading nothing but stuff that reinforces his bias, and suddenly, lo and behold, he's a creationist. Neither surprising nor actual evidence of how amazing and convincing decades-old ICR material was. I'll admit that even if he had wanted to, back in the 70s and 80s, it was a lot harder to fact-check ICR, but he doesn't even seem to have tried.
The Lord led me to quit the fire department to go to the University of Northern Colorado, get my master's degree in invertebrate zoology. And so I got into parasites and discovered a new species, named it Echuaria coloradensis, and so got my master's degree and then just went on from there.
Okay, that's pretty cool. I won't lie.
It's interesting, the similarity in the stories, and also I was wondering maybe someone who never had an evolutionary belief. So this is coming from someone who's never fully indoctrinated into evolution. What is it that makes, this is to both of y'all, what is it that when you first become a Christian, what makes it so difficult to push the evolution aside? What makes that so hard? Why is that so insidious even?
Probably the mountains of physical evidence for evolution as a process and for common ancestry. It's kind of the same reason that most people who become Christians don't jettison heliocentrism or the globe, even though if they really did want to take the Bible as literally as ICR pretends to, they'd have to do both of those things.
Well, that's a good question. And it is hard. Well, at least it was for me. And it's because we've been brainwashed. Mm-hmm. It has changed the way your brain works. It literally has done something to your brain.
I'm going to need a citation for that one, my guy.
And you have to work through that. I still find myself from time to time talking about creation using evolutionary terms.
That's scientific terms. Just say that.
And I don't even catch myself sometimes. It's like it's just built into us because everything about Satan's world system is deception.
Wow, so not only is Satan hiding apparently the majority of the world's animals from people, but also he's the one telling scientists what jargon to use. And despite this, people, like our two speakers here, manage to become Christians without rejecting all that work of Satan. Satan might be the worst bad guy imaginable if this lore were correct.
And when deception is there, it can be very complete. And so it's only by God's grace that we get pulled out of deception. So it's God's grace and His Word.
So there's no compelling evidence for creationism is what he's telling us. Well, good to know.
Actually, the thing that pulled me into being a Christian was John 3:16.
And here I thought it was him abusing his military rank to sexually harass a subordinate. Because that's what he said it was. And I don't have time for this whole explanation of John 3:16.
Dr. Sherwin, how about you?
Well, after I listened to those tapes by Dr. Gary Parker, he went through a testimony very much like Job and I did, and he was teaching evolution, and he was challenged by some of his students and all.
Was it the way Dr. Martin was teaching it? That is, as a non-specialist to non-specialists who don't really need to know it? Well, let's see. His doctorate is not a PhD, but an EDD. That is, he's got a doctorate in how to teach biology and geology. He got his degree from Ball State University in Muncie, Indiana. I'm honestly having trouble figuring out what he taught to students, but it does seem like it was probably biology, that being where his degree is. As I'm writing this, it's basically the first time I'm ever hearing about him.
And so that really made a mark with me. And so when I listened to those tapes over and over again, it made sense of what he was saying. And I had already had my degree in biology. And so many of the questions I had as an undergraduate in biology, Gary Parker answered in that whole Saturday seminar.
Sure would be nice if we got an example of that question that Mr. Sherwin had for Dr. Parker and the answer he was given. It could help us assess the quality of the information Sherwin was getting. Like when Dr. Martin told us about the Gish tract he read. So then I went and read it. Alas, I don't think that will happen here.
But then when I went to graduate school, my major professor was also a militant atheist. And I thought, if he's going to be my graduate professor, I think I should let him know, that I was at least a Christian. And so I told him that. And I remember he sat back in his squeaky office chair and he ruminated. He kind of thought for a while. And he said, well, okay, as long as you understand I'm an atheist and I require all of my students to take a course in evolution.
This sounds like a conversation that's being misreported. A more likely scenario is that Sherwin went to the professor to tell him he was a creationist, and the professor said that he'd still have to take a course in evolutionary biology. I can't say for certain what happened in this case, but I know biology professors, both theist and not, and what he's reporting certainly wouldn't be what happened in their offices, but the version I suspect happened certainly is. I don't know, maybe times have changed.
So this is a 500-level course in evolution, not some little undergraduate thing. This is the hardcore evolution class. Well, by that time, I felt that I knew enough about creation science and all. And I said, that's fine. I probably would have taken it anyway just to see what it was. Well, the class turned out to be really an advanced genetics class. And we talked a lot about natural limits to biological change. And so I was sitting in the front row taking lots of notes, but I didn't hear one fact of real vertical evolution. That is what we call macroevolution.
Well, there's a reason for that. You see, creationists like to define macroevolution as evolution between kinds, without really telling us how we could know if that happened, because kind isn't really given a rigorous definition, and their empirical attempts to identify such groups are generally either hugely deficient in their dataset, don't show what the creationists say they do, or show too much. And so any actual evolution they can't deny just becomes examples of microevolution, even if it's something as extreme as the de novo evolution of multicellularity from single-celled organisms. And any evolution they must reject, like human common ancestry with other apes, is macroevolution. So of course he didn't see macroevolution. Creationists can't see macroevolution even when it stares them in the face.
And so that was kind of an eye-opener for me, that so much was philosophical indoctrination, but without, here's the empirical evidence that shows that we came from a fish. It wasn't there.
Tell you what, here's some of it.
As I'm listening, I think a lot of people would say evolution has nothing to do with religion. From maybe an evolutionary standpoint, if I'm an evolutionist, why are you bringing up maybe Christianity if we're talking about evolution? But it's interesting to see how, as you guys described your backgrounds, because of that evolution, just mindset, that worldview, that framework, then it did mess with your spiritual understanding of God. Or
did they say that? Because I don't remember either of them saying that being a theistic evolutionist changed their understanding of God.
You had to work through that. So just because of, there just are certain things connected to evolution that will impose themselves on the way you view God or anything related to faith. So I love you guys being open and honest about your journey through that.
Honestly, it's hard for me to see which dogma of Christianity is negated by evolution. And that's probably why, when asked, most creationists will say that being an anti-evolutionist isn't a requirement to be a Christian or saved.
You think 5 years? Why couldn't somebody just tell me something and, oh, okay, I'm a Christian, I believe it. Look what the Bible says right here. No, it wasn't that easy.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like texts need to be interpreted, and texts from thousands of years ago, written by people with an almost completely different cultural context, might be especially tricky to interpret for a layperson without any particular expertise in that cultural background or the languages in which the texts are written.
But then once you realize we can trust the Bible, it is true. There's no way evolution, Big Bang to molecules to life to man could happen. It's totally impossible. The evolutionists really admit that in their literature when they're saying this suggests or this is probably or maybe or we hope. What they're really saying is
that they're being honest about the fact that science has reached complete certainty, and that scientists should be humble in light of that fact and not speak or write with unwarranted confidence.
You know what? This is all in my head.
No, it's in the data. Scientists don't just go about philosophizing and then just calling it a day. They go gather the data needed to test the hypothesis. Those data are not just in their head.
And
you don't know.
Yeah, my science proves actually there is a God, there is a design in creation. That's what my science proves.
Saying my science proves is basically just a huge red flag with pseudoscience printed on it in big, bold, white letters. Real science doesn't prove things. Proof is for alcohol and math. Science demonstrates, shows, and disconfirms. It is empirical, which makes it fundamentally a probabilistic enterprise. The probability of an idea being correct in science is never going to hit 1, but after enough 9s accumulate after the decimal point, it's not much worth withholding assent.
Well, it's like, I think it was Dr. George Wald said, you know what? There's really only 2 options. This is a paraphrase. There's 2 options. Spontaneous generation,
which is complex organisms emerging from dead matter as the supposed life force of the now dead organism spontaneously rearranges the dead matter into new life, such as maggots or mice. The phrase has a specific meaning.
Which would be Big Bang to molecules to life to man over millions of years.
No, that's cosmology, abiogenesis, and evolution, not spontaneous generation. Playing a word game to associate the conclusions of science with an incorrect idea that same science has already disconfirmed doesn't score you any points. It just means you're either dishonest or an idiot. Given the moral caliber of someone who'd use his rank to get a date with a subordinate in the military, I think my audience can guess which way I'm leaning.
Or special creation.
Notice how he said special creation? There's a reason for that. It's because there's also the concept of general creation, in which God creates some aspects of the universe, but largely allows it to develop according to the laws of physics after that creative event. Some theists say he did so at the Big Bang, Others that he also created the first life and that it evolved from there. Dr. Martin is just setting up a false dichotomy. Now, my subscribers probably weren't all special creations directly by God, but I suspect most of them were created the normal way baby humans are made, or at least a close variant of it, even if science helped. But that doesn't mean they aren't special. So if you'd like to be special with them, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on all notifications so you're always in the know when I have new material.
He said, those are the only two options we have. He said, Louis Pasteur and others over 100 years ago proved,
Demonstrated, not proved.
spontaneous generation doesn't happen. So that only leaves us one option.
Abiogenesis.
Special creation.
No.
It also leaves abiogenesis plus evolution and various forms of general creation.
But he says, I refuse philosophically to believe in God, so I'm here. It must have been spontaneous generation, even though all the science says it can't be.
Well, first, not all scientists are godless atheists. And second, it's true that none of the science says it can be spontaneous generation. It's other things, like the Big Bang, nucleosynthesis, concretion, abiogenesis, and evolution. Going back to the first point, this is not a fight between atheism and Christianity, as if those were the only positions one could take. This is a fight between science and the majority of religious people, scientists or not, and a fringe of religious extremist conspiracy theorists, exemplified by Dr. Martin here. In case anyone here isn't clear on this, yes, I am saying that young Earth creationism is not science. A young Earth creationist could be a scientist, but it's not likely, and if they are going to do so in science in a field related to young Earth creationism, they're either going to fail or have to knowingly say things that they believe to be false.
So you pray for people like that. Well, he's already dead. But I mean, evolutionists, we pray for them. Because we're bumping into them all the time.
Right.
Feel free to pray for me. If there's someone listening, either they are inclined to do well by me or not. I can't control it. But I doubt they are going to decide on the basis of someone's prayers that they should deceive me about science. If there's no one listening, then it's a waste of your time, not mine. That being said, if you do pray for me, I appreciate that you have a concern for me you thought worth bringing to the most powerful entity you believe to be real.
And we have little animal cards. We made little animal card tracks. And like on our last trip, there was a rest stop, and here's this Buddhist monk. Well, they intimidate me.
I've met a fair few Buddhist monks in my travels, and never did one of them seem intimidating. Mostly they were pleasant and offered me a blessing and a prayer card that was in a language I couldn't read. To be fair, I've also had a similar experience with most Christian monks. The ones I've met were pleasant to me and did not seem particularly intimidating or threatening.
Okay. So he's standing under a tree, and I'm coming back, getting in the car, and my 3 ladies are already in the car. I said, well, did any of you give an animal tract or anything to the Buddhist monk out there? No. Dad, why don't you? No, I don't want to, okay. But okay, so I went out, I'm talking to this Buddhist monk, and I went and they're praying for me. I said, well, Lord, what am I going to say to this guy? He was from Thailand, and we're talking along, and I said, well, now, what do you think about Jesus? No Jesus, just like that. So he knew about Jesus, and he didn't want to hear another thing about Jesus. Okay, I thought that's fascinating, okay.
It's not fascinating that someone didn't want you preaching at them. I recently had a similar experience where a creationist presuppositionalist wanted to debate me, by which he meant he wanted to go through a whole contrived speech about presuppositional apologetics based on God only approving the Bible, whatever that means. I told him I didn't care. I and this monk already know the claims of Christianity, at least at the basic level for him, and certainly more than that for me, but also possibly for him. We've both made decisions regarding our acceptance of it, and I don't currently feel the need for any ham-fisted preaching for a man who thinks that giraffes defy science, or who thinks that asking me if God authorized the Bible means anything to me. I don't actually have a problem with the idea of people trying to convince others that their religious views are correct. That is proselytizing. But when someone makes it clear they're not interested, it's time to back off.
They're supposed to be open-minded. They want everybody to be enlightened, okay?
Right.
First, I'm not aware of any particular reputation for open-mindedness from Buddhist monks, but either way, they do want to help people reach enlightenment as a rule, and don't, as a rule, think Jesus has anything to do with it.
But I did. I had some animal cards, okay? I don't remember which ones I gave him. I have a giraffe here. I gave him some animal cards, our little tracts. He took them. So I'm praying for the Buddhist monk. You might pray. He comes to know Jesus.
I have to be honest, I don't understand tracts. I've never seen one for any position that I found convincing, even in cases where I agree with a conclusion. It's a little tiny bit of text that's usually unsourced with the most basic arguments. Yet I'm informed that apparently they do sometimes work.
Those cards, so you're using animal examples. So let's go back and forth if we can go more into that. Both of you, just a few more examples of animals and how we can see that it's from a creator and that we give, God that credit.
I have to admit, I actually kind of like those cards. I'm sure they're very stupid, but I also kind of want them all. But yes, let's hear all about the animals that couldn't have evolved for more or less no reason.
Well, I have so many favorites, but I really like the relationship between the moth and the bat. Bats are designed by the creator to have this ultrasonic capability. It's a sonar, and it can paint its environment so well with its sonar and take in all that information that they can see with their sonar as well as we can see with our eyes.
I guess echolocation couldn't evolve. Well, let's look at The Evolution of Echolocation in Bats by G. Jones and Eck Teeling, published in Trends in Ecology and Evolution 2006, which, according to Google Scholar, has a whopping 534 citations. Here we find that there is no apparent difficulty in the evolution of bat echolocation to the point that it has evolved more than once, been lost and re-evolved, and that many bat groups have convergently evolved similar echolocation. In A Bony Connection Signals Laryngeal Echolocation in Bats, by Nina Velska et al., we also learned that an extension of the stylohyal bone, such that it contacts the tympanic bone, is found in all laryngeally echolocating bats, and never in other bats. So for at least one group, that extension was important, but that doesn't seem like some problem for evolution. Bone size varies based on genetics. In Acoustic Imaging in Bat Sonar, Echolocation Signals and the Evolution of Echolocation, by J.A. Simmons and R.A. Stein, it's discussed in detail the variations in bat echolocation perception and sound emission. Additionally, they go over the evolutionary pathways by which they may have been derived. Nothing about this is impossible for evolution as understood by evolutionary biologists. And in fact, there are many more papers describing bat evolution. All three of these papers are, of course, in the description.
But as the infomercial says, wait, there's more. Because as this bat is sending out its sonar impulses, it's so loud that it's coming from its nasal region that it could hurt the eardrum. And so the creator, with his design properties, has made the moth to have a special skeletal muscle in the eardrum of the bat. And so as the bat sends out an ultrasonic pulse, which is almost a millisecond, this skeletal muscle contracts in the inner ear that closes it off so it doesn't deafen itself by sending out these very high sonar pitches way beyond human hearing.
Hey, that's the stylohyal and tympanic bones he's talking about. So let's see if this could evolve. Well, being able to hear is basal to mammals, so the first bats almost certainly could do it. In fact, mammals are rather specialized for hearing. So they were almost certainly excellent at auditory perception. Mammals are also almost universally known to make noises to communicate. So pre-bats would have almost certainly started with that too. If you're living in a complex three-dimensional environment that includes caves, and you can fly, then any information from echoes is going to be useful, especially in the dark. So any mutation to associate echo information with spatial information is a positive. That right there sets up a selection pressure for more carefully modulated vocalization. As the volume increases, so too does the effective range of echolocation. But also in tandem, the potential damage to the internal ear increases. So along with increasing volume, methods to protect the ear are under selective pressure, and since the mechanism by which this is accomplished is the kind of thing that evolution can easily act on, the shapes and sizes of bones, I see no reason why there should be some kind of barrier. Basically, this whole talk is just, look at the trees, but instead of trees, it's various animals that are seen as subjectively cool in some way.
And so it's able to paint its environment using that, and then this information is reflected back, all within a split second. So the bat, as it picks up something, like, for example, a delicious moth, which is nocturnal, the moth is trying to evade the bat homes in, and as the bat is homing in, on the surface of the wing of the bat are special receptors, pressure receptors, that has only been discovered in the last couple of years. So that as the bat is making its adjustments, course adjustments, these receptors are sending information up to the bat brain, which is one of the main reasons why it can make such critical adjustments in its flight within quite literally a fraction of a second.
Okay, but hairs in all mammals connect to the nervous system because they are sensitive to motion and pressure changes. So this isn't exactly something that bats are doing that's unique to them, it's common to all mammals, but bats are just doing a lot of it with a lot of precision. I don't see any reason why this is a problem for evolution.
So it's all this information is coming in through the bat wing, coming in through the reflected information of the sonar, and all has to be purposed and put together in the little tiny bat brain within a fraction of a second so it can make its course adjustments. That is just absolutely incredible how, and time and chance and natural processes cannot explain how you could get a bat sonar. We have the megabats and the microbats.
Well, there hasn't even been an attempt to argue that evolution couldn't account for echolocation. We've just been told that it's cool and impressive, but that's not an argument.
And those are the two groups. One group having this ability for sonar. There is sonar, for example, in the cetaceans, the sea creatures, the mammals.
And interestingly, odontocetes, which are the cetaceans that have echolocation, don't produce it the same way. They use a unique organ called a melon that is made of fat that acts as a lens to modulate sound signals. Also, both bats and odontocetes, or toothed whales, use a protein called prestin in their echolocation. But as evolution would predict, while the protein is the same in both groups, in amino acid sequence, they are about as different as they could be in terms of the underlying gene for the protein in each group. That is odd if you want to say there is common design, since you'd expect a designer to copy-paste the same genetics for the same protein, instead of just using different genetics, thereby mimicking convergent evolution.
Which is also very, very unique, and it has a special structure in the head of the sea creature, like a porpoise or a dolphin, it's called a melon, and it has special oil that helps with the transmission of the information.
Hey, we just talked about that. Neat. But also, does this different design result from a different designer? Maybe bats were created by Zeus and dolphins by Poseidon. That would at least account for the different design and genetics.
And there's also some moths that can give sonar back to the bat to confuse it.
Yeah.
Which is amazing. So they can talk back to the bat, tell the bat, go that way instead of this way.
Yeah.
Sonar all the way down.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Okay, let's see. Can insects generally make sounds? Why, yes, they can. Can sound disrupt echolocation whether or not that was the original use of the sound? Why, yes, it can. Is the apparatus by which insects make noise subject to change with mutation? Why, yes, it is. Is there selection pressure to avoid predation by echolocating bats in moths? Why, yes, there is. Is this all that's needed for sound-based countermeasures to bat echolocation to evolve? Why, yes, it is.
Well, my favorite animal is a giraffe. And it was one of the very first ones I studied. And it's stuck with me ever since, and I have shared the giraffe since probably 1972.
I will say that giraffes are cool. He then goes on about how allegedly various people have told him that him misleading them about giraffes kept them creationists in spite of the evidence. Now, that's not how he said it, but it's what happened if he's being truthful. However, other than saying that it's sad, I have no response to it.
So the giraffe, 18 feet tall, bull giraffe, average. Powerful pump to pump the blood up that neck against gravity, okay? Like it weighs up to 25 pounds. It's like a big turkey in there, okay? And when it squeezes, it shoots that blood against gravity, and he does fine. Now he's going to bend his head down and get a drink of water. And the big heart goes squeeze, and the blood goes zoom, and it hits his brains and blows his brains out his ears. And he has to be thinking, I got a problem. When I bend my head down to get a drink of water, I blow my brains out.
I don't think at that point he's thinking much of anything.
So, of course, he doesn't blow his brains out. Why? Because as he bends his head down, our Creator, the Lord Jesus...
Objection. Presupposes facts, not in evidence.
When he's bending his head down, our Creator, Lord Jesus, built little valves, like little spigots in the artery that goes up the neck. They close. But the last pulse of blood is beyond that last valve, and it's under enough pressure to burst the little arterioles in the brain when his head is down. But the last pulse of blood doesn't go into the brain. The last pulse of blood goes whoop into like a sponge, the rete mirabilis, okay?
For this, let's go all the way back to Talk Origins, wherein Mark Isaac pointed out in 2004 that Darwin himself had already addressed this. Quoting, Darwin answered this claim in 1868. The claim assumes that gradually must mean one at a time. Not so. The different features could have, and almost certainly would have, evolved both simultaneously and gradually. Partial valves would have been useful for reducing blood pressure to a degree. An intermediate heart would have produced enough pressure for a shorter neck. A smaller net of blood vessels in the head could have handled the lesser pressure. As longer necks were selected for, all the other components would have been modified bit by bit as well. In other words, for each inch that the neck grew, the giraffe's physiology would have evolved to support such growth before the next inch of neck growth.
Or rete mirabilis, as some say. That expands. It's like a sponge. He doesn't blow his brains out. He gets his drink of water.
Yep, but those valves are extensions of the blood vessel wall, and the so-called sponge is a network of further blood vessels. It's not like giraffes poofed a whole new organ system into existence that didn't have evolutionary antecedents.
Now he sees some wildebeest running toward him. He ignores them. He sees a lion coming toward him. Oh, the lion wants to eat me. By the way, how does it know the wildebeest doesn't want to eat it and the lion does?
Giraffes that routinely are scared and run from non-threats expend energy to do so, reducing the energy they can expend on reproduction. If they fail to run from actual threats, they will likely simply die, removing any further chance for reproduction. So in short, giraffes, like basically all animals, are under strong selection pressure to recognize threats and non-threats as such, and to react appropriately. And since we know that behavior is in part genetic, this is subject to natural selection, and thereby evolution.
Okay. He said, I got to get out of here. So he jumps up, he runs about 3 steps, boom, passes out. Not enough oxygen to the brain.
Is this suddenly a fake hypothetical giraffe? Because that's not what happens. Giraffes don't just pass out after raising their necks from having lowered them to get water.
So while the lion is eating him, he has to be thinking, I got another problem here. When I get up too fast, I pass out, and the lions eat me. I'm going to have to evolve something here to fix this problem.
Blood rushing from the brain when bringing the head up is common to basically all animals. It's just more of a problem for taller animals. The blood comes from the reserve that we've been calling a sponge, but as Dr. Martin mentioned, is more properly called the rete mirabilis. But this isn't a unique feature of giraffes. It's common across birds and mammals, and is simply a complex of blood vessels used to help equalize blood pressure in the brain of animals that would otherwise have significant fluctuations. Now, how extensive it is varies from organism to organism, with those who only have a little need of it having a very small one, and those who have great need, such as a giraffe, having an extensive one. But like the heart valves, this evolves in tandem with the length of the neck. So as the neck grows a bit longer, it also puts selection pressure on the rete mirabilis to grow larger. Evolution doesn't proceed by adding one feature, then adding a support system for that feature, and then another support feature. Giraffes didn't evolve giant necks only to suddenly find that now they needed valves and a sponge. The valve and sponge and neck grew together over time in the lineage that led to modern giraffes, while in other lineages that led to more normally proportioned giraffes, like the modern okapi, that didn't happen.
Well, dead animals can't evolve anything to fix any problem, all right?
Translation. Natural selection means that evolution can't happen. I'll admit, that's a new take for me, and it's quite the take. To turn it around, it's sort of like saying that I can't be a Christian because obviously Jesus rose from the dead. Pointing out that one of the central parts of an idea is true isn't your best argument against the idea. Just free advice for creationists.
But of course he doesn't pass out, because as he brings his head up, those valves open, and by the way, you can't have a partially evolved valve, or he's dead.
Wrong. A modern giraffe can't do that, but a giraffe ancestor with a modestly long neck can. Because even if they do not fully close, they will still act more or less like Tesla valves, reducing the flow rate, increasing the head loss, and decreasing the pressure at the brain. That's good enough for a giraffe with a neck, say, half as long as a modern giraffe's.
Okay, so they had to be created fully functional. That sponge under the brain gently squeezes that last pulse of oxygenated blood up into his brain. He's doing just fine. Only God could do that. That's all there is to it.
Or, it's extremely easy to explain via natural selection and mutation, which it is. I'm writing this in 2022, and it's been easy to explain since 1868 at least. So, more than 15 decades. In fact, most young Earth creationists actually would say that the long neck of the giraffe is a post-flood feature, since all extant and fossil giraffids evolved from the giraffid pair on the ark, and that was evidently short-necked, as it is the basal condition of Giraffidae.
I have shared that on university campuses just full of atheists and evolutionists. And I've said, okay, somebody tell me, how did that evolve? You know what their answer is? Given enough time, it'll happen. I said, well, what's the mechanism?
First, what that probably means is he wasn't talking to students who are actually studying that field. College kids aren't just paragons of all the subjects one could possibly learn. They are themselves merely students and have focuses. But anyway, the mechanism is good old-fashioned natural selection and mutation. That's all that's needed. No endosymbiosis, no sexual selection, no neo-functionalization of horizontally transfer genetic material. Nothing fancy like that. Just mutations to developmental genes that are selected for.
Over time, it'll show up. Okay. I mean, they don't have an answer because they don't have an answer. Right. God had to do it, just like he says.
So while asking students about this, it seems that Dr. Martin never bothered to check on what professionals who actually study this said, because if he had, he'd realize that there is in fact an answer. He doesn't have to accept it, but it exists.
He spoke it into existence. And you think about that. Look what he spoke into existence. Animals that can live in the jungle, animals that can live in the ice and snow, totally different diets, totally different feet even. So they can run like a polar bear. Different kind of feet. So it can run on the ice, doesn't slip.
Polar bears grow hair on the bottom of their feet for a better grip on ice and insulation to avoid frostbite in their toes and feet. I'm not sure what about that is a problem for evolution, nor why animals adapting to very different habitats is a problem. That's kind of the whole point of evolution, organisms adapting to their environment. Pointing out that the world is the way evolution would expect isn't really an argument against evolution.
So in the winter, its hoof gets hard so that it can chip through the ice.
Polar bears don't have hooves. What is happening right now? Does this man actually think that polar bears have hooves?
In the summer, it gets soft so it can spread out and walk on top of the tundra so it doesn't sink in because the surface is going to thaw. I mean, God thought of every detail. The caribou, total different digestion in the winter than in the summer.
Fun thing, biorhythms are controlled by both external cues and genetic factors, the latter of which are subject to natural selection. So I'm glad that Dr. Martin has scads of incredulity, but that means nothing in science.
All right?
In the same animal.
Same animal.
No.
And in the winter, it eats snow. In the summer, it drinks water out of a stream. What's the difference? Well, when it eats snow, it's not getting minerals. If it gets more minerals, that means it has to get rid of the minerals that it doesn't need, which means it has to get rid of excess water, which means it's getting rid not only of water, but heat. So by eating snow, it can keep the water. It doesn't make it have to go to the bathroom. So now it's keeping the heat. And then when it breathes out, it doesn't make steam because its turbinate bones are like a rolled up newspaper. So when it breathes out, these bones, they pull all the moisture back out so it's not losing moisture.
Remember when this was all about differences in digestion, and now we're just talking about water retention? Pepperidge Farm remembers.
I mean, God thought of everything. I mean, jungle animals. Well, we're not going to go there. But I mean, the same thing. You're thinking, wow, this guy has no argument beyond cool animals exist. So before the flood, I think everything was still eating plants.
Yeah.
Now, can lions eat plants?
Can lions put plant matter in their mouths and swallow it? Yes. Can lions in the wild live as vegetarians? No. Their teeth can't effectively process plant matter, they have essentially no ability to digest cellulose, they have a severe taurine deficiency that really can't be made up for by eating uncooked plants, and their digestive tract is too short to effectively digest plant matter.
Well, of course they do. Well, your cat gets sick. What does it do? It goes out in the yard and eats grass, eats whatever it can find.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in an effort to vomit, the plants are serving as an emetic, not as nutrition. This is like pointing out that sometimes humans have taken ipecac, formerly used to induce vomiting in medical contexts, and then saying that therefore humans can live off the stuff exclusively. I promise, you'll starve if all you consume is ipecac syrup. By the way, ipecac was used to rapidly treat acute poisonings, but it is less effective than activated charcoal and itself presents a mild risk.
Your dog, in World War II, we were sending all of our meat over to feed our soldiers in Africa and Europe and over that way. They fed the big cats in the zoos soybeans.
Soybeans, like most beans, are highly toxic unless cooked, and that applies to cats as much as to humans. So pray tell, who was cooking soybeans for all the pre-flood kitties? This right here is exactly why I said that the cats can't get the nutrition they need from raw plants. Humans can use all sorts of thermal and chemical means to treat plant matter to make it easier to digest for a cat. So if it's getting that, then sure, it can get more nutrition from the plant matter. But I don't think that's really much of an option for wild cats. Unless we want to say that basically all modern hypercarnivores like cats and monitor lizards were all vegetarian pets of humans who depended on them entirely for their food. Indeed, while cats can survive for a while without meat, even specially prepared vegan food for cats in the modern world still does not provide enough nutrition, especially protein and taurine. That's why Christina M. Gray et al. Recommended against vegan diets in their paper Nutritional Adequacy of 2 Vegan Diets for Cats, published in the American Veterinary and Medical Association on December 1st, 2004. And that's just the first of many papers reporting on the inadequacy of vegan and vegetarian diets for cats. Will a lion die if it just eats cooked soy and rice or something for a year or two? Probably not. But it will be malnourished and far from thriving. It will, in fact, be on its way to the player select screen.
They thrived, okay?
No, not okay. I can't find any documentation at all saying this. All I can find is research that says that this idea is laughable that lions could survive off plants. The whole thing just comes down to, guys, lions could eat plants before the flood as evidenced by the fact that they can absorb plant proteins from cooked plants. And all lions would have to do is harvest beans, find a way to build a fire, find a way to make pottery, then boil the beans and also survive without taurine. Yeah, that's super plausible, guys.
Just because an animal has big teeth doesn't mean it has to eat meat.
And no one judges animal diet by the size of the teeth. It's based on the shape of the teeth. Flat teeth mash up leaves. Cusped teeth take on harder things like seeds and nuts. Shearing teeth tear through flesh. And while a layperson might look at the big canines of a camel and think it's a meat eater, an actual anatomist will look at their grinding and crushing molars and chomping, not piercing incisors, and correctly conclude that it's a vegetarian. At least most of the time. Just about anything will take a bit of meat if given a chance and a low risk.
Well, Dr. Sherwin, do you have any other examples, maybe from your invertebrate line of thought?
Yeah, I'd like to hear that.
Let's talk about something a little weird.
Yeah, well, trying to think some of the invertebrate creatures, mostly what we find, for example, in tidal pools.
So like crabs, snails, mussels, barnacles, clams, limpets, and sea stars, and sea urchins. At least those are the invertebrates I'm used to finding in tide pools.
And there's lots and lots of invertebrates there. As a matter of fact, 95% of all fossils are marine invertebrates, which are like clams.
Oh, forgive me. I guess for no reason we're switching to fossil marine invertebrates. We've been doing all extant organisms so far, but sure, why not? Let's talk about marine clams or something. Also, I'm willing to bet that Frank Sherwin couldn't tell the difference between a clam and a brachiopod.
But I think some of the more fascinating marine invertebrates, of course, is the octopus.
Okay, well, I guess that was just a completely irrelevant thing about fossils that had nothing to do with anything. But sure, let's talk about the octopus. I do like them. In fact, if you like them too, I suggest reading the book Children of Ruin, which has a bunch of them in it. Although you may want to read Children of Time first. Both are by Adrian Tchaikovsky, and both explore the evolution of sapiens in organisms vastly different to humans, and how that affects their developing societies, and also how humans might interact with them. The first book also explores ideas like how deep time might be experienced in a single human lifetime with things like Einsteinian time dilation and suspended animation technology, as well as transhumanism.
And the octopus is absolutely incredible from the get-go. It is so bizarre and so strange because it's one of the very few animals that can alter its RNA, its ribonucleic acid.
I was going to ask him for a citation, but I found it, so I won't bother. This is from RNA Editing Underlies Temperature Adaptation in K+ Channels for Polar Octopuses. Note that K+ means potassium ions. And yes, it is true that polar octopus species do edit their RNA to allow certain functions at extremely cold temperatures that would otherwise be too slow to function.
They haven't been able to see that in any other kind of animal.
Oh, so no argument then. Okay, what's the next true thing that Sherwin can say that in no way will he argue is a problem for evolution, but will just assume his audience will think is a problem, because he's primed them to think that neat means no evolution.
It also has eyes very much like our eyes, like a vertebrate's eyes, but of course the octopus is an invertebrate.
Which is why it has structural differences, like a blood supply that is proximal to the retina rather than distal as it is in vertebrate eyes, which results in them lacking the blind spot common to vertebrate eyes. It's almost like these distantly related organisms had similar selection pressures throughout their history, but since they independently evolved these superficially similar eyes, there are actually deep structural differences between them.
And so the problem with that is, from an evolutionary standpoint, trying to explain how you could have the octopus eye that looks so much like a vertebrate or a human eye.
It's not a mystery at all. It's precisely what we should expect. superficially similar organs doing the same function that are significantly different when you look at the underlying anatomy.
But also at the same time, there are structures on the surface of the skin of the octopus called chromatophores. These chromatophores are microscopic, but they are nonetheless absolutely amazing in the fact that it can secrete into the skin, the chromatophore, pigments. And the pigment change can be affected within a split second. And we've seen videos, and you can go on YouTube and see how an octopus can swim up to an outcrop of rock and immediately take on the shape and also the color of that rock output just within a fraction of a second.
Well, chromatophores expand and contract. They don't excrete the pigment out into the skin. That would make color changes far too slow. But yeah, chromatophores are cool. But again, cool doesn't mean problem for evolution.
Well, that means the octopus has to have a special neuroregulatory system from its brains, and it has multiple brains.
Kind of? So the octopus has a central brain and a ring of nerves around the mouth, about where the arms grow from. And then each arm has its own large nerve cord. Now, similar to how many reflex actions in humans don't need to be processed by the brain, for example, if you touch something very hot, your hand will pull away before you even really process the pain. That's because once the signal gets to your spine, it's the spine that sends the reflex action impulse to your arm. Similarly, the arms of an octopus are at least partially controlled directly by the nerves running down to the arms. So while they are semi-independent, it's not really fair to say that an octopus has more than one brain. It doesn't, at least not more than you do, by having a spine that can send signals to the limbs independent of the brain.
Going down to these chromatophores affecting the change within a split second.
In fact, no, the chromatophores are controlled by the central brain, not the nerves in the arms. And this is true in cuttlefish as well. In fact, the control neurons for them are mapped onto the brain in a way that spatially correlates to where they are on the body. So the cascades of neural activity in the brain can correlate with waves of color activity, which is pretty cool. In fact, I'd argue that's cooler than what Sherwin is telling us.
It has suckers, and the suckers have detectors, receptors on it that it can taste with the suckers.
This just in, the primary anatomy for food acquisition in an animal has chemoreceptive capabilities. Next up, we learn if you really do get wet when jumping into water.
And octopus has 8 arms, but it uses 2. It uses 2 more than the other 6.
Handedness, the evolutionist nightmare. Honestly, why is he even saying this? He's certainly not making a point.
I remember a story that shows an octopus, dare I say it, might have something like a sense of humor.
He then just tells a story about an octopus that rejected a piece of rotten shrimp by jamming it into the filter intake. Then a story about sneaky octopuses getting out of their tanks and messing with the tank fixtures and eating animals in other tanks. There is no point to these stories, and they're long, just like his whole presentation.
Yeah, definitely some design there.
Yeah. And by the way, octopus has always been octopus because
he doesn't know about Protoroctopus ribetti, an actual proto-octopus, hence the name, from the lower Caledonian stage of the Middle Jurassic. It is basal to both Octopoda and Vampiropoda, so it looks like we do have transitional fossils showing the evolution of modern cephalopods. Weird that.
An octopus, it has no internal skeleton or anything.
No, they have no bones. They do have a skeleton. It just happens to be hydrostatic. So it uses the essentially incompressible nature of water to transmit force and keep parts of the body rigid. That's not no skeleton. It's just not a skeleton like a human or even an insect has.
Evolutionists said to have an octopus fossil is like finding a fossil of a sneeze, because it's just a kind of a gelatinous type thing. But they have found very clear impressions of octopus in the fossil record.
True, including transitional ones.
Which leads one to believe, well, let's see now, it had to be buried suddenly.
It's false.
And catastrophically.
No way.
No time frame at all.
Pure fiction.
Because it's all made of a gelatinous ooze. So we're talking about a very catastrophic burial, kind of like you would get with a flood. Maybe a flood could do something like that.
False. So let's look at where Protoroctopus was found. I'll bet it's basically the opposite of a flood deposit. Oh look, I just checked, and it was found in the La Voult Lagerstadt in France, which is, and I quote here from Charbonnier et al., a low-energy and deep-water depositional environment. Si vous préférez, le papier a dit un milieu de dépôt comme sur une tranche d'eau importante. Who could have ever guessed that he'd be exactly wrong about the kind of depositional environment that results in excellent fossils of invertebrates without hard parts?
I am shocked. Shocked!
Well, not that shocked.
And not only that, but giraffes have always been giraffes.
Ah, yes, I forgot that animals like Cephalotherium giganteum, Giraffocarex punjabiensis, and Brahmatherium megacephalum just never existed. Those fossils were planted there by Satan to trick you.
If your elitist East Coast evolution is real, why has no one found the missing link between modern humans and ancient apes?
We did find it. It's called Homo erectus.
Then you have proven my case, sir. For no one has found the link between apes and this Homo erectus.
Yes, they have. It's called Homo habilis.
Aha! But no one has found the missing link between ape and the so-called Homo habilis.
Yes, they have. It's called Australopithecus africanus.
Oh, I've got you now. Fair enough. But where, then, is the missing link between apes and this Darwinius macilli? Answer me that, Professor.
Oh, okay, granted that one missing link is still missing. But just because we haven't found it doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
Pshaw! Things don't exist simply because you believe in them. Thus saith the almighty creature in the sky!
Whales have always been whales, and
Ah, yes, because the protocetids, with their more than 20 distinct genera, are also just tricks from Satan to test your faith in Jesus.
just on down the list it goes. As a matter of fact, one other thing about the whale is whales, of course, are marine mammals.
What does it even mean to be a mammal if evolution is false? It's not like mammals share common ancestry according to these guys. Why should mammal even be a category?
And whales don't get cancer, and that's kind of a strange situation. So there's a lot of research to be done there.
This is just not true. Whales do get cancer, but they get it at a surprisingly low rate. And the research has been done. They have extra tumor suppressor genes. Almost like as they grew large, having extra tumor suppressor genes was a selective advantage or something. And also, almost like we've observed gene duplications in real time, so that's not exactly a mystery.
But whales, as they dive down, they have to expel all the air so they don't get nitrogen narcosis, the bends. And whales have a very, very dark skeletal muscle. The skeletal muscle of the mammalian oceanic mammals is almost black.
I mean, whale meat can be dark, as in this picture of whale meat in Japan, but it can also be quite pale, as in this picture of whale meat also in Japan. Japan being one of the only countries that still engages in commercial whaling. I'm not sure where we're going with this.
And that's due to a special protein called myoglobin, which is a hemoglobin type of a molecule, but is found encased in the muscle.
I mean, it's distantly related to hemoglobin. I'm not sure I'd call it a hemoglobin type protein. They do have similar functions, though.
And so we have hemoglobin in our blood.
As do whales and all vertebrates. But also, virtually all mammals and most vertebrates make myoglobin in their muscle. You ever see that clearish red stuff at the bottom of packaged meat? That's not blood. That's myoglobin seeping out.
So as the whale dives down, it exhales the air, and it can go down many, many feet. And everything shuts down except to the heart and the brain. So the heart still is beating, and it's beating, putting up the blood to the brain to keep it alive. Everything else is shut down.
How could the whale swim if its muscles are shut down? Maybe it doesn't shut everything down, because of course it doesn't. That would be fatal.
How come the tissue doesn't die? Goes back to that myoglobin. That myoglobin is packed with oxygen. So the whale can stay down there for a long time, extracting oxygen from the myoglobin, which is packed in the muscle, and then come back up. So it's just amazing, amazing design features.
I'm not sure why making more myoglobin than most mammals do is a problem for evolution. I keep saying it, but myoglobin production is controlled by genes, and those genes are subject to modification by mutation, including to upregulate and produce more myoglobin, which, if beneficial, can be selected for. And I'm going out on a limb and saying that deep diving whales are benefited by longer stay times and deeper dive depths under the water. After this, one of the hosts goes on about faith or something. I don't care, so I'm cutting it.
I can tell you what one of the biggest hang-ups is those days in Genesis. And people just can't, that was a struggle I had. They just can't get by the billions of years.
Yeah, I bet that being demonstrably wrong about how old Earth is by a factor of more than 757,000 is a bit of a hang-up. That's about the same error as saying that the distance to the moon is 0.5 kilometer. Even flat earthers aren't that wrong about the distance to the moon. Or saying that the Empire State Building reaches almost 90% of the way to the actual moon. Or saying that Usain Bolt ran 100 meters in only 12.7 microseconds. I can't imagine why being that wrong might make people not take you seriously.
because we basically are taught billions of years will solve all the problems. Just give it enough time, and we get stuck on that.
I mean, there are also actually tens of thousands of studies all supporting it, independent of what would be convenient for evolution. I don't care, and neither should anyone else.
But you can't get billions of years out of the Bible.
If your interpretation of the Bible is contradicted by reality, then either ditch the Bible or change your interpretation. After this, it's a long diatribe about how to properly interpret Genesis. I super don't care about that. Interpret it however you want.
But what I like to tell people who are being raised in a theistic evolutionist environment in a college or a university,
I just appreciate the rare acknowledgement that theists who accept evolution for the fact that it is actually exist, even if he disagrees with them.
I like to share with them that there are natural limits to biological change. Amen. And that we can we can change, get thousands of different varieties of roses, but they're all roses.
Yes, that's how evolution works. Once a group splits off and is isolated from a sister group, those two groups can now go on to diversify, but their descendants will remain part of that bigger group. For example, in becoming primates, the ancestors of humans didn't stop being mammals. And in becoming monkeys, they didn't stop being primates. And in becoming apes, they didn't stop being monkeys. And in becoming humans, they didn't stop being apes. But if you go for another group, the ancestors of foxes didn't stop being mammals when they became carnivorans, nor did they stop being carnivorans when they became caniforms, nor did they stop being caniforms when they became canids. Nor did they stop being canids when they became foxes. If you have a rose, all of his descendants will be roses, because that's the law of monophily. You can't outgrow your ancestry. If you have children, how many generations will have to go by before their descendants are no longer your descendants? There is no number, because all of them, for as long as they persist, will be your descendants.
So there's a lot of what we call horizontal variation. Same thing with dogs and all that. But we don't find that real vertical macro evolution. I challenge him to look at the literature, to ask the professors, give me compelling evidence for real vertical evolution.
Okay, here you go.
Otherwise, all the examples, the class I took in evolution in Colorado was all just a genetics class where we looked at the natural biological changes, but they were limited changes that occurred.
Limited by what? In what way? I mean, in principle, any given change to a genome is at least possible, from whole genome duplication all the way down to single nucleotide point mutations. What limits this? He won't say, it's just a catchphrase. There is no mechanism limiting the population genetics of organisms to certain boundaries. At least none that has ever been proposed, let alone confirmed experimentally or observationally. Then he goes on with yet more Bible stuff. I don't care. But then it's finally, mercifully, over. This video was physically painful to watch and respond to. I literally got more than one cluster headache just writing this script. I'm actually currently fighting through a cluster headache just to finish it off. Well, I hope I took all the pain so that you don't have to. I also hope you learned something about the truly remarkable animals that just happen to pose no particular challenge to the theory of evolution. If you liked this video, hit the like button. If you didn't, tell me why not in the comments, and hit the dislike button. Either way, please do subscribe and hit the bell icon and turn on all notifications so you're always notified when I have new content. I'm the Dapper Dinosaur. Thanks for watching, but before you go, I just want to say a special thank you to my channel members and my patrons, especially those pledging $20 or above. Bob Knob, Work in Progress, Vanthoven, Tapioca Weasel, Denny5252, Ian Chen, Landon Knoll, Mabdy Babdy, McSpooks, Sphincter of Doom, The Venerable Bede, and Atheist Animal. As you probably know, YouTube is a very volatile platform, and from month to month my income on the channel can swing wildly. But the people you see on screen are directly supporting so that I don't have to worry too much about that, and the channel can keep going as it is, and perhaps even improving. If you'd like to join this team, there are links below to join the channel or in the description to join the Patreon. The Patreon starts as low as $1 a month, and the channel memberships start as low as $1.99 a month. On Patreon, you can even get a discount for pledging annually. If you do decide to pledge, you'll get access to an exclusive Discord server just for channel supporters, as well as early access to all of my pre-recorded videos, often up to 2 months in advance. Higher tiers will unlock even better perks. Now, if the annual or monthly pledge isn't right for you, but you still want to support the channel, there is a merch store down in the description, as well as an Amazon wishlist, just for me. And if financial support isn't something you can or want to do, then if you still want to help out the channel, please just like and share these videos and make sure you comment on them. It really helps the channel out. Thanks again for watching.